12, 12 sound, clean. Micro. Okay, ready, 12. We'll go clean. Play 12, track dissolve.
As Ethiopia continues to boil from conflict-torn Tigray down towards Addis Ababa, diplomats, including Special U.S. Envoy Jeffrey Feltman, work to avert an insurgent attack on the capital. Climate change is the big topic at the global COP26 summit. Madagascar's repeated droughts have raised the UN Food Programme's estimate of mass hunger there to over 1.1 million people, a number expected to double by June. Kenya's animal rights activists are working to stop factory caging of poultry, a practice Europe banned out of cruelty concerns. Those stories and more on today's Africa 54, right now.
Ready,
the Horn of Africa, Jeffrey Feltman, is traveling to Ethiopia after rebel forces from the northern Tigray region said they were moving toward the capital. Meanwhile, Addis Ababa has declared a state of emergency. VOA senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain reports.
On Thursday, Ethiopia marks the one-year anniversary of brutal fighting between government forces aligned with Eritrean forces and rebels in the northern Tigray region. Now, rebel forces say they are advancing on the capital, Addis Ababa, and that it could fall within months or even weeks. Ethiopia's prime minister vowed that his government will prevail.
Ethiopia will not collapse. Ethiopia will prosper. Ethiopia will forever exist with her honor by defeating all who test her throughout the blood and bones of her children.
As residents of the capital read in their newspapers, the Ethiopian government declared a state of emergency and called on residents to defend their neighborhood if rebels arrive in the capital. The president of the Tigray region blamed the Ethiopian government and their allies for the suffering. State Department spokesperson Ned Price called on all the warring parties to end the fighting and protect the lives and rights of citizens. He said the State Department has now updated the travel advisory for Ethiopia to level 4.
What that means is we are advising U.S. citizens do not travel to Ethiopia. We are recommending that U.S. citizens in Ethiopia consider departing now using commercial options that remain available.
The UN human rights chief said the year-long conflict was marked by extreme brutality.
We have reasonable grounds to believe that during this period, all parties to the Tigray conflict have committed violations of international human rights, humanitarian and refugee law. Some of this may amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. Civilians in Tigray have been subjected to brutal violence and suffering.
A report by the UN Human Rights Office with the government-created Ethiopian Human Rights Commission found that sexual violence has been rampant in the conflict, detailing reports of gang rapes by various parties against women and girls, but also against men and boys. Cindy Sain, VOA News.
South Africa's ruling African National Congress is nursing a fresh political headache on Thursday after its worst election result. Local polls are showing support for the legacy party of Nelson Mandela dropping below 50% for the first time. Results from 99% of polling stations in local elections only give the ANC 46% of votes cast, suggesting anger over corruption and poor service delivery had led some voters to defect from the party or refrain from voting. The ANC, led by President Cyril Ramaphosa, has consistently declined at local polls. In the last municipal polls in 2016, the ANC garnered 54%, but rival parties have been unable to capitalize on dissatisfaction with the ANC. As world leaders talk at the COP26 climate summit, Madagascans like Mercy Celestina are forced to live on cactus flowers amid successive droughts caused by climate change. David Doyle has the story.
As world leaders were preparing for the COP26 climate summit, Mercy Celestina was collecting cactus flowers to eat. She lives in southern Madagascar, where several UN agencies have been warning that drought is causing a climate change famine. The 47-year-old says her 8-month-old son died because of cactus fruit seeds that had piled up in his stomach.
Look at our crops. There are no leaves growing, not even one. When you pass on the road, you can see it's dry. There are only sandy winds.
The UN's World Food Programme reports that more than 1.1 million people in Madagascar have been affected by severe hunger, with 14,000 in near famine-like conditions. It expects that number to double by the end of the year. Video filmed by the WFP showed young children being tested in mid-October. The red band indicates severe malnourishment. WFP Country Director for Madagascar, Arduino Mangoni, says poor agricultural production has sent prices skyrocketing, meaning people can't afford to eat.
These people have not contributed to climate change, but they're paying probably the highest price.
Madagascar produces less than 0.01% of global carbon dioxide emissions, according to the World Carbon Project. Indeed, Africa as a whole is responsible for just 3%, but is seen as the most vulnerable region to the impacts of climate change. At the COP26 summit in Glasgow, Madagascar's President Andry Rajoelina has been among leaders of developing nations demanding the wealthier world keep its promise. A more than decade-old unmet pledge to provide support of $100 billion a year. Asked what she would want to tell world leaders at the summit, Celestina said simply that the forest has a life, just as humans do, and that the lack of rain is breaking her heart.
That was David Doyle of Reuters reporting. As climate change triggers deadly heat waves, droughts and floods, 3 UN agencies are rolling out funding plans to improve weather forecasting in vulnerable countries. Olivia Chan has more.
The United Nations has announced that it's rolling out funding plans to improve weather forecasting in vulnerable countries to further protect them from climate change, including 75 small island nations and least developed countries. The announcement was made at the big climate conference happening in Glasgow, COP26. The countries targeted by the initiative have done little to cause the climate crisis, but face the biggest and costliest impacts as climate change triggers deadly heat waves, droughts and floods. The World Meteorological Organization said weather-related disasters have increased 5-fold over the last 50 years. And more than 91% of the associated deaths have occurred in developing countries. The initiative aims to plug gaps in weather monitoring and data collection so developing countries can better prepare for climate-related disasters. For example, in recent years, weather data for Africa has declined as readings from weather balloons equipped with observation equipment decreased by about half between 2015 to 2020.
Olivia Chan of Reuters with that report. The COP26 climate summit is taking place against the backdrop of an ongoing COVID pandemic. As richer nations begin to reopen thanks to rapid vaccination programs, most people in developing countries are still waiting for their first vaccine shot. Henry Ridgewell examines whether distrust between richer and poorer nations could hamper climate negotiations.
In most high-income countries, more than 70% of the population has received at least one dose of a COVID-19 vaccine. But in low-income countries, the figure is less than 4%.
The latest figures show that if this level of vaccine inequity remains in place, 5 million people will die unnecessarily next year.
At the June G7 summit, leaders of the world's richest nations pledged to share 1 billion vaccine doses with poorer countries, half from the United States. In total, the US has now pledged to share 1.1 billion doses through 2022. Yet, while many Western nations are offering a third booster shot for fully vaccinated adults, most people in developing nations still await their first dose. As negotiations on combating climate change continue at COP26 in Glasgow, trust between poorer and richer nations is fragile, says Yates.
You can very much see countries, particularly in the South, saying, well, why should we cooperate with you on this issue, which is happening now, but is going to get worse, on the situation around climate change, where you're patently not helping us at sufficient scale on something of a much, much more immediate nature that can threaten millions of people's lives next year.
COP26 organisers offered free vaccines to registered delegates unable to get them in their home countries. But high travel costs, a lack of hotel rooms and concerns over high infection rates in Britain have kept some participants away. Musonda Mumba of the United Nations Development Programme chose not to attend the COP26 summit and spoke to VOA from Nairobi.
Climate change is not just a climate issue, it's a climate justice issue. And so you see an intersection on the COVID side of things and on the climate change side of things as well, really converging. The issue of trust and empathy and transparency has come up over and over and over again. And I think this will be the test case. This will be a testing moment for the world, this Glasgow COP.
Scientists say the world is facing two emergencies at once.
At the COP26 summit, there is a recognition that countries need to work together to tackle the existential threat of climate change. But many of the delegates here will return home to countries still gripped by the coronavirus pandemic, in urgent need of life-saving vaccines. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News at the COP26 summit in Glasgow.
Kenyan animal welfare advocates are campaigning against the battery cage system of commercial poultry management. The system has been banned in Europe out of concern for the birds' welfare, but now it's beginning to gain popularity in Africa. Victoria Munga reports from Kakamega, Kenya.
Grace Acheng's 1,400 hens have been her income source for a year now. Acheng says friends also keeping such birds introduced her to this system of wire cages for hens. Most poultry farmers using the technology are least sensitive to their welfare. To farmers like Acheng, battery caging is the easiest way to raise chicken as opposed to the traditional free range.
You can imagine the stress of walking, picking eggs in between the birds, or even if they have where they are producing, they are laying. You might even find some which are dirty. They have pooped on it. So yes, birds are supposed to be left to free range, but those experts again should realize that there is technology coming in, and so that is the battery caging.
However, animal welfare groups are campaigning against battery cage technology for what they say is violating the birds' welfare. African Network for Animal Welfare's program manager Dennis Bahati told VOA that the technology that is fast gaining popularity in Kenya is compromising with the health of the birds.
So these birds are placed in an area where they cannot actually express their natural behavior. And because of that, some of their natural behaviors like stretching their wings and flapping is actually restricted to a big extent. The other aspect, because of that confinement and these birds not being able to exercise, they are prone to a condition we call osteoporosis, where their bones are actually very fragile and they're actually prone to fracture anytime.
Kenya's poultry sector has not been clearly regulated, but state officials say a poultry farming bill that aims to ensure poultry welfare is adhered to is due to be law in 6 months.
The regulation also gives guidelines on how birds should be transported from the source to the market or even to the slaughter point. along all those operations, there are government inspectors to be placed along the chain.
In June, the European Parliament voted to ban the battery cage system of poultry management within the next 6 years. Kenyan officials and animal welfare advocates face tough times ahead in convincing hundreds of poultry farmers like Achieng to drop the technology. Victoria Amunga for VOA News, Kakamega, Kenya.
We'll be right back.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Linoch Mudu, in Washington, every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
The different diaspora groups that make up the United States inevitably have fought for representation through the voting process. VOA is profiling a group of emerging politicians with direct ties to Africa who are changing the face of American politics. One is Esther Abaje, whose parents are from Nigeria.
My name is State Representative Esther Githui-Ewart. I represent House District 59B, which covers downtown Minneapolis and parts of North Minneapolis. It's a pretty vibrant district. It's got diversity in its economic classes, and it's got diversity in its ethnic groups and racial groups. And it's really just a fun place to live, and I'm really happy to be their representative. My parents came to the United States in the 1980s. They both immigrated from Nigeria, and they both actually came to Minnesota to attend the University of Minnesota, which is where they met. I have always had jobs that were in this space of helping people or ensuring that people had the resources they needed to do something better for themselves. So one thing that I was interested in was how do we help more people at once? Often that means going to a lever of government. So that was why I was always keen on the idea of running for office. The opportunity arose for the 2020 cycle, and I jumped at it.
I was born and raised right here in Minnesota, and I am passionate about representing 59B because I want to build the most inclusive district in our state.
Very big difference between campaigning and legislating. When you're campaigning, you're very full of ideas, and you're full of hope, and you're full of vision, which stays with you once you start legislating. But there becomes now, in Minnesota, we have a total of 201 legislators between our House of Representatives and our Senate. And so you are just one of 200 other people that you have to convince to be able to bring your idea and your constituents' ideas into fruition to create policy and change. So there's much more negotiating once you become a legislator.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Githui-Ewart.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. This pandemic has exacerbated the problems that we have in housing. And this bill, though not everything we want, will mitigate kind of the worst of those problems, particularly for people who have lost their jobs and cannot afford the rent.
A lot of people talk about the pandemic, saying the pandemic showed the inequalities and inequities in our society. All the pandemic did was just shine a brighter light on them. We have been dealing with a housing crisis in Minnesota for years. And that is one of the things that I actually want the state of Minnesota to be bold and step forward on how do we provide dignified, adequate housing for all members of our society.
Well, I think about all the work you've done on housing in particular. Just being able to see it all the way through from the perspective you have is so valuable. Because without that, we're not going to get the solutions that people actually need.
You know, me and a couple of other legislators have released statements that have gone against the grain of the traditional DFL leadership. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think we need all of those perspectives, so that way we're getting a real sense of what real people are dealing with. And so I think as we get more people who are, you know, people-oriented, justice-focused, I think that means we can do a lot more better work for the state of Minnesota. I think across the world there are people who with less means, so less money, maybe people in marginalized groups in their countries who are, as they have been, standing up. I think 2020 was a big year for that, particularly with the pandemic. I think the movement in Nigeria is young people were rising up, standing up against, to want a government to work for them. So I applaud their efforts. I think same with young people across the United States and across the world who are standing up and saying, you know, our rights count for something. I wholeheartedly, you know, agree with them and want them to succeed in their efforts. And I, as a young person here who is in a seat of decision making, am also working to make sure that we are doing the work to support everyday working people. As a legislator, it's definitely eye-opening to see the challenges, but also the opportunities across the state of Minnesota. And I think that many of my fellow legislators or decision makers, especially those with immigrant backgrounds, can also see those same challenges and opportunities. And we welcome collaboration with anyone.
On Friday, we'll conclude our Elected in America series with a feature on Minnesota State Senator Omar Fateh, whose parents are natives of Somalia. So be sure to join us. The Tour du Faso is a 10-day bicycle race through the conflict-stricken Burkina Faso. It began in the southern city of Banfora, October 29th. Now, one Burkinabe rider hopes to build on his Summer Olympics performance and secure victory despite security concerns. Henry Wilkins is following the race north from Lombila.
Paul Dumont is one of 80 cyclists taking part in this year's Tour de Faso, Burkina Faso's answer to the world-famous Tour de France bicycle race. Since October 29th, cyclists have pedalled their way across the country with a new stage each day. Dumont is back from the Olympics in Tokyo and hopes to improve on his performance in his home country. He says breaking into cycling was tough, but at just 22, it's already taken him all over the world, from Japan to Switzerland.
You could say that cycling, whether in Burkina Faso or in the rest of the world, is a sport that is difficult to get into, because you need a machine, and the machines are relatively expensive. You have to be lucky enough to already have a bike, or someone who can lend one to you to get started.
He says that the Cycling Federation in Burkina Faso helped him with a road racing bike after he showed potential. But you need a good bike to get to that level in the first place. Despite difficulties with access, the sport of cycling is becoming more popular in Africa, and the Union Cyclists International's annual Africa Tour takes in 11 countries, including Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso is in the midst of a 6-year conflict involving terror groups linked to the Islamic State group, Al-Qaeda and local bandits, and security has deteriorated in recent months. The organisers and participants at this year's event, however, were pushing ahead, and the atmosphere was festive. When asked about security, one of the organisers said it was a concern.
Yeah, sure, it's one of the big difficulties for us, because of course when we have, for example, European countries, we are not all the time sure, but we have a big organization. We have the military with us, we have the police with us.
Contenders from Europe say they're not worried about security.
Oh, I don't feel unsafe at all. I think everyone is very friendly, and like I said, I haven't felt unsafe at all. Otherwise I wouldn't be here.
Bonne chance. Local riders say they're enjoying the cosmopolitan nature of the event, but have their eyes on the prize.
I thank the foreigners who came, and I also thank the cyclists, the runners from Burkina Faso. May God give us the yellow jersey.
Meanwhile, Dumont has already placed in the top 10 in the first 2 stages of the Tour de Faso, which will reach its conclusion on Sunday. Henry Wilkins for VOA News, Lombila, Burkina Faso.
Senegal has all the makings of a vibrant surf scene, consistent breaks, warm water, and a friendly, inviting culture. But without access to the raw materials needed to shape their own boards, many miss out on the fun. One local surfer found a unique way to create his own boards and has launched a business with the goal of becoming the first Senegalese surfboard shaper. Annika Hammerschlag reports from Dakar.
Shaping a surfboard from scratch requires a great deal of skill and precision. It also requires a host of raw materials such as resin and fiberglass, which are hard to come by in Senegal. But those obstacles never deterred Pape Diouf from trying to make his own. Diouf grew up in Dakar's seaside Yoff neighborhood, where he learned to surf on boards borrowed from friends, boards that were typically imported from Europe or left behind by tourists. But Diouf says he always dreamt of making his own.
It allows you to not be dependent on the West in order to have boards. So once there's a possibility to find a board locally, it will help the Senegalese surf industry develop much more easily.
In 2019, a Lebanese Senegalese surfboard shaper agreed to teach Diouf how to shape and repair boards. Since he didn't yet have the funds to purchase materials, Diouf began salvaging old discarded boards and repurposing them into new ones. He often gave them away to young surfers from his community who didn't have their own. Over the last year, Diouf raised more than $15,000 through online crowdfunding and from international investors. He was granted a free 6-month training meant to help local entrepreneurs develop their businesses. He's now in the running for a second round of investments. He plans to use the money to purchase the foam blanks he needs to shape the boards from scratch. Walid Moukadem is the surfboard shaper who trained Diouf.
It will be a first. It will really be a first. I don't think there are many African surfboard shapers. To know that tomorrow Pape can sell his own boards, it's huge.
Experts say there are many benefits to having surfboards shaped locally, particularly in countries where boards are not easily accessible. In Senegal, where infrastructure and businesses often rely on foreign investment, it's also a matter of national pride. Oumar Sai is the vice president of the Senegalese Surf Federation. He was the first professional Senegalese surfer and has witnessed the development of the country's surf industry.
What we would appreciate more is to have surfboards made in Senegal from Pape. It's our hope to have boards made in Senegal by a Senegalese shaper.
Sai says he looks forward to one day watching Diouf train the next generation of Senegalese surfboard shapers. Annika Hammerschlag for VOA News, Dakar, Senegal.
And that wraps up our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.